The key lesson in this video is that it doesn't matter how long you've been doing one thing or you have been on one particular path in life, you can evolve and change and become something else, and you can transition and expand your skills or change your career entirely just by committing to change and committing to learning about what it is you want to do. You can become anything you want to become. You can do it. All you have to do is just commit. Are you considering transitioning from photography to video? Well, you can do it because I was able to do so successfully. Now, even though shooting videos has never been easier than today with the development and advancement of technology, you can't just pick up a video camera or a camera phone or a DSLR, press the record button and call yourself a videographer. There are many things that you have to take into consideration. There are certain things you have to learn to be able to make that transition. Just because you're a photographer and you know how to use a DSLR or a professional camera, or you know how well to take photos even with your camera phone, does not mean that you can automatically begin to shoot videos and become very good. You have to learn the essential differences, and that's what this video is about. This video is about the things that you need to take note of, the things you need to be aware of before you can successfully make that transition and call yourself a videographer. The essential difference between a photographer and a videographer is that while one tells stories through still images, the other tells stories through moving images. One can say that moving images help you to tell a richer and a more complete story than still images. Still images are very powerful in their own right, let's make no mistake, but moving images can help fill in the gaps or can help answer questions that still images may not be able to answer in trying to present a story. So, for example, travel to a village to capture the story of maybe a philanthropist who dug a borehole in the community, and you are there to capture the story of how the borehole was dug and the impact it has had in their lives. As a photographer, you would capture certain images that, yes, when people look at those images, they'll say, wow, this is a remarkable story. Capture images of the people in the villages watching as the borehole was being dug. You can capture people behind the scenes in the creation of the borehole, and you could capture people at the borehole fetching water, drinking, and expressing all kinds of emotions, right? But there's only so much a photograph can tell. The rest is left up to the imagination. But for a video, you can capture everything that happens, most of what happens, all the highlights of what happened. The planning for the borehole, the site preparation, the moving the equipment in. You can capture the reactions of the people in the village and the children as they watch the borehole being dug. You can capture the very first moment that water comes out of the borehole and the reaction of the people. You can capture people expressing their emotions with tears and joy a lot more than you could with just photographs. So that's just a little example to show you how important videographer is. And if you are keen on storytelling, if you are passionate about telling stories like I am, you would definitely want to consider learning videography, learning how to make better videos and tell better stories. So first, I'll tell you very briefly how I was able to make that transition, how I was able to move from being a photographer to a videographer. Now, don't get me wrong, it's not like I have stopped photography. That can never happen. Photography is my first love. I love making images. My love for storytelling has led me to learn the art of visual storytelling through moving images. I was able to make that transition by first learning all the technical differences between photography and videography. Things like frame rates, relationship between shutter speed and frame rates, learning not to use your shutter speed to control or influence your exposure like you would do in photography, where you can play around with shutter speed if you're trying to increase the exposure of an image. In videography, more or less, there's a limitation to how much you can do that. And things like using ND filters, creating motion with camera movements, panning, tilting, following, and so on. I also had to explore the different camera accessories that are unique to shooting video and the different camera functions and settings on the camera itself that are dedicated for video making. So things like learning about picture profiles, learning how to shoot with flat color profiles to be able to retain more detail, more information for you to use when you're editing the video, and things like learning how to manage focus settings. So learning how to do manual focus, as well as learning how to, maximize whatever camera focus settings are available to be able to help you get the best focus, to make sure that your main subject is always in focus no matter what. Learning how to frame from one scene to the next. Unlike in photography, you have one frame and you've placed your subject and you take your picture. But in videography, that subject might be moving across different scenes, and so you need to be able to create the best composition for that particular scene. And lastly, entering the world of audio, because in photography, no one thinks of audio. If you're you're on set while shooting photographs, it doesn't matter if people are shouting at the top of their lungs and there are all kinds of noises in the background, your still camera is not going to capture any of that sound, but in videography, sound is so important. In fact, many people have said audio is equally as important as video, if not more important. In fact, if you have very bad audio, it might be even better to just shoot photographs and create a slideshow than to create a video with very bad audio. When you have very bad audio, you lose your audience. All right, so these are some of the considerations that you want to have when you're transitioning from a photographer to a videographer. And in the next part of this video, I'll be going through 10 different things, 10 key, very important things to keep in mind when you're making that transition. You may just want to write those things down on your notepad and use it as a guide in studying as you begin to make that transition. Join me as we go through those 10 things. The first is frame rates. In videography, understanding frame rates is paramount. Frame rates dictate the number of individual frames captured per second. Common frame rates include 24 frames per second for a cinematic feel and 30 frames per second for standard video. It's crucial to choose the appropriate frame rate to achieve the desired motion in your videos or desired feel or quality in your videos. So you can study about frame rates, frames per second, all right? Because in videography, you can set the camera to capture a certain number of frames per second, and that will help you in terms of creating that cinematic feel, natural look, so that when people are watching a video, it looks more like what they will see in real life. And also very important in creating very smooth slow motion. So if you want to create videos that have slow motion, like when you're watching music videos or action scenes in videos, you need to understand that the reason why they were able to achieve that is largely because whoever was behind the camera knew or understands the number of frames he needs to capture per second to be able to create that look. So that's the thing about frame rates. There's much to say, but this video is just going to summarize. I'm just going to touch on those points. Not an in-depth tutorial, but I think it will help you to bear in mind the things you need to know. The second thing is shutter speed. Shutter speed in videography is a departure from photography norms. Unlike in photos, where you can either have high shutter speeds to freeze motion or slow shutter speeds to blur motion, in videography, videographers typically use a shutter speed that is double the frame rate. This creates a natural motion blur, contributing to a smoother and more cinematic look. Video resolution is also a very key consideration. Unlike in photos, where the resolution can vary widely, you can set your photo or export your photo at different resolutions. In video will often adhere to standard resolutions such as 1080p, that is full HD, 4K, and now we have even other resolutions like 8K, 2.7K, and so on and so forth. Higher resolutions offer more detail, but they usually consume much more storage space and require higher processing power. If you're shooting at higher resolutions, you need to be sure that you have enough space on your memory card. You need to be sure that your camera or your device has the processing power. And you also need to be sure that even your editing software, your editing device like your laptop also has to have sufficient processing power to be able to process those images. Because if you're using a very low spec laptop, you'll struggle when you're editing 4K footage. Another thing to consider is aspect ratio. Aspect ratio matters in videography. While photography allows for creative freedom in choosing different aspect ratios, video often follows standard aspect ratios such as 16:9, ratio 16:9, and that could either be vertical or horizontal depending on whether you're shooting for social media, stories, and full regular viewing settings. So understanding and framing your shots accordingly, according to the aspect ratio, is therefore very important. So you need to be aware that an aspect ratio in video is usually limited to 16:9. That's the most common, and then from there on you can adjust to more specific aspect ratios depending on your requirements, whether you want to, for instance, shoot horizontal videos for social media, or you're shooting for YouTube or a documentary and so on. Now, audio quality. Audio is just as important as video quality. Unlike photography, where sound is typically irrelevant, videographers need to pay attention to audio capture. You need to invest in a good microphone, and you need to understand concepts such as recording levels, mic placements, and the use of external audio recorders. You need to understand how to sync audio to your video and sync audio from different sources. When I was starting videography, this was one aspect that was a bit tricky for me. How do I sync the audio I'm capturing on another device with the video I'm capturing on another device? And luckily, a lot of these softwares have some auto features that can help you automatically sync audios from different sources, but you also could learn how to do this manually. I've had to do it manually at times. And so yes, it's important to understand that you need to be able to do this because the audio is really important. And that's why major movie productions, if you've ever visited or seen a movie production set behind the scenes or looked at the production budget or a production process for video, you'll see that the investment in audio is almost as much as for video. There are separate personnel that are whose sole responsibility is just to capture good audio. So you have up to like 10 people, and if you look at the credits after a movie, you will see like hundreds of people whose job is just to make sure they're capturing good audio. So audio is really, really important. In video, also very important is focusing techniques. Unlike in photography, where commonly people use autofocus settings, so you just depress the shutter halfway and the autofocusing settings in the camera kick in and pick up your subject, focus on it, and then you press your shutter all the way and it captures. In videography, a lot of videographers usually prefer manual focus because they have greater control and they learn how to adjust the focus depending on what they're trying to capture. So learning to pull focus very smoothly, moving your focus from one area of the frame to the other or from one subject to the other is a valuable skill, and tools like follow focus systems help in this regard. Not only that, some cameras also have different more advanced settings for autofocus, continuous autofocus during video capture. That might be a key consideration when you are trying to choose the camera to buy to start doing your video. If you are really keen on getting good video focus at all stages in your video, you would look out for cameras that have good continuous focus systems that are customizable and adjustable. But traditionally, a lot of videographers also have learned how to get comfortable with manual focus while shooting. Sometimes you can set up your camera in a camera rig that has a follow focus or a pull focus system, so that while you're shooting, you're just gradually turning the knob and the camera is picking up the focus according to the way you want it. So those are some of the differences between photography and videography. Now, another important thing is what I would call cinematic techniques. So these play a very significant role in videography. So understanding concepts such as depth of field, composition, camera movement, camera motion, camera framing, composition, all of these are very important in visual storytelling. These techniques contribute to the overall video narrative in a way that static photography does not. So you have to understand, like in videography, you're moving from one scene to the other. So imagine you're following a person as he's walking through a city block or walking through from one building to the next, and his one scene he's in the shade of the building, in the next scene he's turning around the corner. So when you're capturing all of that in video, you need to understand that your framing will have to change per time depending on the story you're really trying to tell. Again, sometimes in video you have to be very creative. So in some scenes you're looking at the camera is following the person, it's a headshot and it's following the person, and then in another scene you're capturing the foot as it's hitting the street and walking. So sometimes you want to just capture the person walking. You might focus on other aspects of the person, maybe the clothes he's wearing and all of those things. As the environment, you might take a wide shot to capture the environment, you might take a drone shot to have a bird's eye view of the environment. So these are different things you want to consider in terms of storytelling. So stick with me, I'm almost at the end of the video. I have just about 2 or 3 more points to go. White balance, very critical. White balance considerations vary in videography, unlike in photography where white balance can be left on auto and adjusted in post-processing. You can change white balance in post-processing quite easily because it's a static image. It's not going to change, right? So once you set it to warm or cold or whatever Kelvin you want to set it in, it's going to stay there. But however, in videography, as your camera is moving from scene to scene and the light is changing, especially where you're shooting in natural light settings and you're not fully controlling the light, it's a good idea to keep your white balance fixed at a certain value so you are fully in control. So videographers need to ensure consistent white balance settings, because it's not easy to correct that in post. I've had situations where my camera is trying to adjust to different light settings, maybe artificial lights around me and so on, and the white balance just keeps changing and it's almost impossible to start splitting your video at different parts and then adjusting the white balance per scene. Best just make sure you control your white balance right from the beginning, and so that you have consistent white balance settings throughout your video. Have you heard about ND filters, neutral density filters? There are some aspects of photography where ND filters are commonly used, especially like in landscape photography, portrait photography, outdoor photography. But for the most part, most photographers do not use ND filters. But in videography, ND filters allow videographers to control exposure in bright conditions without compromising shutter speed or aperture settings. You've heard of the exposure triangle. So in photography, you have the exposure triangle. One end of the triangle is shutter speed, the other is aperture aperture and the other end is ISO. In photography, you have the flexibility to adjust any of these settings depending on the lighting conditions and depending on the kind of creative feel or creative effect you're trying to achieve. In videography, however, because of the 180 rule, which compels you to keep your shutter speed at double the frame rate. So if you're shooting at a frame rate of 24 frames per second, you want your shutter speed to be about 48 to 50, and you don't want to change that because you don't want to affect the field look of the image. So that takes shutter speed out of the triangle. So all you're left with is aperture and ISO. And to a large extent, depending on the color profile you're shooting with, if you're shooting with a flat color profile, you're also a bit limited in how much you can adjust the ISO. And also for aperture, maybe you're trying to create a scene where there is some depth of field and you don't want to adjust your aperture so much as to eliminate that depth of field. What do you do? So this is where ND filters come in. ND filters are like sunglasses for your lens. They reduce or help you control the amount of light that is entering the camera, which gives you the freedom to continue to shoot at the settings that you want to shoot. ND filters are almost like a must for videography, and that's why advanced, highly professional, Hollywood grade cameras, ND filters are even part of the camera. They're baked into the lens itself, so you can control how much light is entering the camera. So ND filters is a very important aspect shooting video, and it's something I might want to explore or consider or learn more about. Lastly, I'm going to talk about editing. So transitioning from photo editing to video editing requires learning new software and workflows. There are so many video editing tools out there like Adobe Premiere Pro, Final Cut, DaVinci Resolve, CapCut, Filmora, and there are so many, and they all have different interfaces, different capabilities compared to photo editing software. So that is probably an area that you're going to spend a lot of time in, all right, because you may be able to quickly grasp the shooting and capturing part if you're a photographer already and you're familiar with using a DSLR camera. You're already familiar with the exposure triangle, so you already understand things like shutter speed, ISO, and so on and so forth. But then video editing, in fact, for me, that was the part of video making that discouraged me at first, and why I said there's no point, I can't go into all of this, right? But once I got the hang of it, once I started learning how to use very simple basic video editing software, and I graduated gradually to more complex and more advanced ones, it became a breeze. And once you're able to get through that learning curve, you would be more than excited to start shooting videos all the time. The thing about video editing is that you have to understand things like timelines, keyframes, basic editing principles, learning how to cut your video, learning how to sync your audio, learning how to optimize your audio, and doing creative stuff. So those are some of the things you have to learn. So we've gone through 10 different considerations for you as a photographer who is trying to move into video editing. And even if you are not a photographer and you want to go into video making, this video will help you. Make sure you watch the video again and just take note of all of those 10 things. And I'm sure that you will agree with me. Just like I said at the very beginning of the video, it is possible for you to become anything you want to be and learn anything you want to learn. Doesn't matter the field you're in. This video is primarily made for photographers who are trying to become videographers. But even if you are, for instance, a caterer, all right, and you want to now go into some other field or move to the next level in your field, I hope this video encourages you and helps you to realize you can become anything you want to be. And that was the main motivation for making this video, because I was able to transition. I hope this video has been helpful. I hope you enjoyed it, and please, if you did, share this video, like it, drop a comment. If you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.